It wasn't every day that a man found himself out of work on a planet whose name he couldn't even pronounce. Jasper Talland, once known across Sector 4 as the driver, leaned heavily against the edge of his now empty locker. The chill of the metal bit into his palm, grounding him in the stark reality of his failure. His fingers brushed the frayed collar of his jacket, a small reminder of better days. His gaze drifted across the cavernous hangar, its vastness echoing the emptiness in his chest. The hangar smelled of burnt circuits and ancient hydraulic oil, a blend that had once been a comfort to him, a reminder of countless successful jobs. Now, it only heightened his sense of defeat. Parked in the center of the bay was the sleek, unmarked ship he'd piloted for years, its polished hull gleaming under the harsh lights. Standing beside it was his client, the one he should have picked up 2 days ago. The alien towered over him, its frame impossibly lean and wrapped in nearly translucent skin that shimmered faintly with a greenish tint. The harsh overhead lighting revealed faint, pulsing veins just beneath the surface, giving it an almost spectral appearance. Jasper had nicknamed the species Eldred, though he doubted they'd appreciate the familiarity. This one, in particular, radiated an air of quiet displeasure, its deep, unreadable eyes fixed on him like a judge delivering a silent verdict. Jasper tried to salvage the moment. "Look," he began, his voice hesitant, "I didn't mean to be late. The Proxima route was gridlocked, and I had to detour through a restricted zone. Nearly got clipped by a patrol squadron." A long, delicate hand rose, cutting him off mid-sentence. The alien's movements were slow but deliberate, its silence far more cutting than any words could have been. Without a word, it turned and ascended the ship's ramp. The faint hum of the closing hatch felt like a final nail in Jasper's coffin. This wasn't just a failed job. It was the end of his career. The Eldred's people had already filed a formal complaint with Earth Base Command. Word had come down. He was terminated, effective immediately. His years of spotless service, the hundreds of successful transports, the life-or-death missions he'd handled flawlessly, none of it mattered anymore. One mistake, one missed pickup, and he'd been blacklisted. Jasper could already feel the rumors spreading. By the end of the day, every station from here to the asteroid colonies would know about his slip-up. In the close-knit world of intergalactic transport, a single black mark was enough to end a reputation. As the Eldred disappeared into the depths of its ship, its pale figure caught the light one final time before vanishing completely. A soft hiss signaled the hatch's closure, leaving Jasper alone in the cavernous hangar. "Guess that's it," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He wasn't sure if he meant his job, his identity, or the last shred of dignity he had left. Both of them seemed adrift in that moment. When the hangar doors slid shut, sealing the vast space behind him, Jasper stood in silence, staring at the emptiness of the concrete floor. After a long pause, he turned and shuffled toward the service exit, clutching a single battered suitcase. It felt as though he was leaving more than just his job behind. Something intangible, something he couldn't name but knew he'd never get back. For the next 2 days, Jasper drifted aimlessly around his cramped station quarters. His old aviator jacket hung loosely over the back of a chair, while his visor helmet sat forgotten atop a stack of unopened messages. The work-issued tablet he'd relied on for years remained untouched, its screen dark and mocking. The thought of checking it, of seeing another assignment or schedule that no longer applied to him, felt like a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. At one point, he found himself talking to the coffee machine, a habit he'd picked up back when his ship had been his home between long hauls. There was something oddly cathartic about venting to an unresponsive appliance, even if its only reply was to churn out the same bitter brew time and again. On the second night, after finally succumbing to a fitful sleep, Jasper was jolted awake by a low, guttural rumble. The sound rolled through the docking bay like distant thunder, unsettling and unfamiliar. He sat up abruptly, blinking against the haze of sleep as the noise grew louder, closer. He stumbled to the window, his bare feet cold against the floor. Outside, 5 motorcycles idled in formation, their sleek, angular frames glowing faintly with alien glyphs etched along the sides. The riders, shrouded in reflective helmets, stood motionless under the docking bay's dim lights. Jasper's stomach twisted into a knot. These weren't ordinary delivery drones or passing star couriers. No, these machines were custom-built, powerful, expensive, and unmistakably dangerous. Their kind was usually reserved for high-profile couriers, mercenaries, or, as the rumors often suggested, assassins. He hesitated, then stepped outside, still groggy and underdressed in a wrinkled shirt and worn pants. The cool air hit his bare feet, but he barely noticed, his focus locked on the riders. One dismounted with fluid precision, the faint hum of their bike fading as they straightened. The figure's uniform was jet black, adorned with cryptic insignia Jasper didn't recognize but instinctively knew carried weight. The rider reached up, removed their helmet and revealed a young face. There was a hardness in their expression, an intensity that hinted at a life far beyond their apparent years. They stared at Jasper with a look that was both calm and unyielding. "Jasper Talland?" the rider asked, their voice sharp, formal, and edged with something that could either be respect or a warning. Jasper swallowed, his throat dry. "Depends who's asking." The rider didn't answer immediately. Instead, they pulled a small device from their belt and pressed a button. A holographic emblem flickered to life, a symbol that sent a jolt of recognition through Jasper's chest. He couldn't quite place it, but it stirred something deep in his memory, like a melody half-remembered from years ago. The symbol belonged to the Unity Guild, an elusive organization Jasper had only heard whispers of. They were more than just transporters. They were problem solvers, risk takers, and sometimes operators willing to handle the kinds of jobs no one else dared to touch. "Jasper Talland," the rider said again, their tone unwavering. "You've been summoned by the Guild. They have a job for you." Jasper narrowed his eyes, unsure if this was some cruel prank or the setup for a nightmare he couldn't wake from. "The Guild? You're saying they want me to work for them?" The rider shrugged, his gaze flicking toward his companions, who remained motionless on their humming bikes. "Not exactly," he said, his tone sharp. "They want you to prove yourself. You messed up, Talland, but they think you might still have some use. Maybe," he crossed his arms, his expression unreadable but cutting. "Or maybe you'll just fade away, like every other washed-up driver who couldn't hack it in Sector 4. The sting of the words hit home, but beneath the insult, Jasper felt the faint stirrings of hope. A chance, fragile and faint, to redeem himself, to prove he was more than a failure. "What's the job?" he asked, forcing his voice to stay calm, masking the thrill of adrenaline coursing through him. The rider smirked, tilting his head slightly. "You'll find out soon enough. Let's just say this one's going to require you to show up on time." His eyes dropped briefly to Jasper's bare feet, a silent jab at his current state. "Get yourself sorted, Talland. Fast." The Guild doesn't wait. With a quick hand signal to the other riders, the leader turned back toward his bike. The others, helmets still in place, revved their engines, the sound growing louder and filling the quiet docking bay with an ominous growl. Jasper nodded, more to himself than anyone else, and backed into his quarters. He grabbed his jacket from the chair, the one with threadbare cuffs and a patchwork of scars from years of scrapes and misadventures. As he slid it on, the weight of it settled over him like an old ally. He pulled on his boots next, their worn soles fitting his feet like a second skin. His eyes swept over the small room, and for a moment, a flicker of regret touched him. Not for leaving, but for the pieces of himself he'd left unfinished here. The ambitions, the dreams, the life he'd once imagined this place would hold. What was supposed to be a sanctuary had become just another empty space, one of many scattered across the galaxy. Outside, the bikes waited, engines thrumming with the promise of danger and the unknown. Jasper adjusted the cracked helmet he hadn't worn in years, its scuffed visor blurring the dim lights of the station. He stepped out, the cool night air biting at his skin as he climbed onto the fifth motorcycle. The faint scent of burning metal and synthetic oil seeped through the old filters of his helmet, sharp and strangely familiar. The rider ahead motioned for him to hold on, and without another word, the convoy roared to life. The synchronized growl of their engines shattered the stillness of the station as they sped into the night. Jasper tightened his grip around the waist of the rider in front of him, the force of acceleration pressing him back. A strange sense of freedom rushed through him, carried on the speed and the hum of the bike beneath him. It had been years since he'd felt anything like this. The last time was a high-stakes transport mission, dodging asteroid debris and weaving through planetary defense systems with seconds to spare. Now, as the stars streaked past and the wind howled against his helmet, he couldn't help but feel it again. The thrill, the danger, the spark of a second chance. Back then, his reputation had been untouchable, his career on a steady climb. Now, he was just another disgraced driver, clutching the back of a stranger's bike, with no idea where he was headed or why. The bikes weaved through the narrow channels of the docking station, their engines echoing off the metal walls. Neon lights from shop fronts and hangar signs reflected in streaks across their helmets, distorted and surreal. Jasper caught a fleeting glimpse of himself in a pane of glass as they sped past, the hollow eyes staring back at him, a painful reminder of how much he'd changed. Eventually, the familiar corridors gave way to the open expanse of the outside world. Above, the endless night sky stretched out, stars scattered like distant beacons. The bikes accelerated, engines roaring as they tore across a desolate stretch of barren ground beyond the station. Jasper felt a pang pang of longing for the days when worlds like this were just dots on his windshield, fleeting pit stops on his route. Now, the irony was cruel, grounded, with his future no longer his to control. Time blurred as the convoy raced under the stars. After what felt like an hour, the bikes finally slowed, their engines lowering to a steady growl before coming to a halt near an unmarked facility. The building was squat and nondescript, a shadow barely visible against the dark landscape. But there was no mistaking the insignia carved into its surface, the same symbol from the hologram. He was on guild territory. Jasper dismounted, his legs unsteady beneath him as he pulled off his helmet. The chill of the night air hit his face, grounding him in the reality of the moment. He didn't recognize the place, but everything about it exuded authority. The young rider who had spoken to him earlier stepped forward. "Welcome to Guild HQ, Talent," he said, a thin smile flickering across his face. It carried both a hint of reassurance and something more foreboding. "Not much to look at, but it gets the job done," Jasper scoffed, trying to mask his unease. "You dragged me all the way out here for this?" The rider arched a brow, unimpressed. "This isn't a sightseeing trip, driver. The guild doesn't hand out jobs to just anyone, especially not to someone who's—" He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Performance has been less than stellar." The jab landed harder than Jasper cared to admit. His fists clenched instinctively, the urge to argue rising in his chest. But he held back. He had no leverage here, and the bitter truth was impossible to deny. Swallowing his pride, he followed as the group led him toward the facility. Inside, the building was stark and utilitarian. No grandiose decorations, no warm welcome, just sterile hallways bathed in cold light, the quiet hum of unseen machinery the only sound. They walked in silence until they reached a door at the end of the corridor, marked by a single blinking blue light. The young rider gestured for Jasper to step forward. He straightened his shoulders, determined not to show how unsettled he felt, and entered. The door slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, sealing him in. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with tension. Jasper's gaze quickly landed on the figure standing in the center, a woman whose presence filled the space. She radiated authority, her sharp eyes cutting through him like a blade. This was no young enforcer or recruit. This was someone who held power, and Jasper knew immediately she wasn't here for small talk. Dressed in an unmarked black suit, she exuded authority with an unsettling calm. Her eyes carried a quiet intensity, her every movement deliberate, as if even her breathing was measured. "So, you're the infamous Jasper Talent," she said, her voice neither harsh nor welcoming, but edged with something Jasper couldn't quite pin down. The driver who struggles to keep track of time. Jasper straightened, his shoulders tense. "It was one mistake. I missed a single assignment." Her lips curved into a faint, humorless smile as she leaned forward, the dim light casting sharp shadows across her face. "A single assignment?" Her tone dropped, her words cutting. "You failed an Eldred transport. Do you have any idea what that means? This isn't about being late. This is about trust, reputation, and the ripple effects of your failure." Jasper met her gaze, his jaw tight. "I know what it cost me. Do you?" Her tone softened just enough to make the question feel heavier. For a fleeting moment, Jasper thought he saw something almost human in her expression. Understanding, perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "The guild has seen men like you before. Talented pilots, sharp instincts, but pride has ruined more careers than incompetence ever could. Do you know why you're here?" He hesitated, unsure of the right answer. "You've got a job for me?" She chuckled, a low, mirthless sound. "A job? No, Jasper. What we're offering is a second chance. And those are rare commodities in our line of work." She leaned back, folding her hands on the desk. "But it comes at a price." Jasper's pulse quickened. "What kind of price?" Her eyes locked onto his, unyielding. "Let's call it a test. A test of loyalty, of resolve, and of whether or not you're worth the guild's time. There's a mission, one that demands precision, discretion, and skill. The stakes are high, and failure is not an option." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "The mission is about more than just the cargo. It's about you, Jasper. If you succeed, you'll earn a chance to rebuild your reputation. If you fail," she let the sentence hang, her smile sharp and unforgiving. "Well, let's just say you won't have to worry about your reputation anymore." Jasper's chest tightened. The choice wasn't really a choice, and he knew it. If he wanted his life back, this was his only shot. He swallowed hard and forced his voice to sound steady. "I'll do it." Her smile deepened, a flicker of satisfaction in her otherwise stoic demeanor. "Good. Let's introduce you to your cargo." She pressed a button on the desk, and a door at the far end of the room slid open with a soft hiss. Jasper turned toward it, his heart thudding in his chest as he stepped through the doorway. The room beyond was small, cold, and dimly lit. Standing near a low, padded bench was the last person. If if one could call it that, he'd expected to see. The Eldred, its towering, translucent frame was motionless, but its almond-shaped black eyes locked onto Jasper with a palpable intensity. The alien radiated silent fury, its gaze cutting through him with an almost physical force. Jasper froze, every word he'd prepared dissolving in an instant. The weight of his failure crashed over him anew, oppressive and suffocating. He had expected the guild to challenge him, maybe even threaten him, but to confront him with the very thing he had failed, that was a trial he hadn't seen coming. The Eldred stared at him, unblinking, its dark, alien eyes heavy with meaning. Slowly, with deliberate precision, it lifted one skeletal hand and gestured toward the seat across from it. Jasper hesitated, then obeyed, lowering himself into the chair. For the first time in years, he felt truly small, like a child summoned before a judge. Human, the Eldred's voice rasped, low and gravelly, vibrating through the air between them. You abandoned me. The words struck like a blow, sharp and undeniable. Jasper opened his mouth to reply, to explain, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say? There was no excuse the guild hadn't already heard, no justification that could erase what he'd done. This wasn't about making amends. This was retribution. He began, his voice faltering. It wasn't intentional. The Eldred's gaze sharpened, unrelenting. Intent does not change outcome, it replied. Because of you, I was vulnerable. The admission cut deeper than Jasper had expected. The Eldred were a race synonymous with resilience, their stoic nature often mistaken for invincibility. For one to admit vulnerability, especially at his hands, felt like a betrayal on a scale Jasper hadn't fully allowed himself to confront. What can I do to fix this? Jasper asked, the raw edge of desperation creeping into his voice. The Eldred tilted its head, studying him with unnerving focus. Your actions will speak. Words are meaningless. Before Jasper could respond, the guild representative's voice broke through a nearby speaker, cold and direct. Talend, your task is straightforward. Escort the Eldred to the transport vessel and ensure its safety. There will be no deviations, no delays, and no further chances. Jasper swallowed hard and nodded, rising from his seat. The weight of the guild's expectations pressed down on him, but he squared his shoulders. This was his moment, his chance to reclaim his name. Yet, as he turned to lead the Eldred out of the room, a nagging thought surfaced. Why had the guild orchestrated this? Why confront him with the one passenger he'd failed? They walked through the sterile corridors of the facility, the flickering overhead lights casting distorted shadows on the polished floors. Jasper's mind churned with questions, though he didn't dare voice them. He kept glancing back at the Eldred, the alien's calm, inscrutable demeanor only heightening his unease. When they reached the hangar, a sleek black shuttle awaited them. It was smaller than the vessels Jasper was used to piloting, but its design screamed precision and speed. For the first time in days, he felt a spark of something familiar, excitement. His instincts as a pilot stirred to life as he ran his hand along the shuttle's smooth hull. He was about to climb aboard when the Eldred's voice stopped him. Human, it said, its tone deliberate and heavy. Do you understand what you carry? Jasper turned, frowning. What are you talking about? The Eldred's gaze didn't falter. The guild harbors secrets. You are part of one now. This is more than a transport. It is a journey toward understanding. And if you fail, there will be far more at stake than just your reputation. The Eldred's words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Jasper hesitated, the weight of the statement coiling tightly in his chest. His job had always been straightforward. Pick up the cargo, deliver it, get paid. No questions, no complications. But now, as he stared into the fathomless black eyes of the Eldred, that illusion of simplicity cracked and fell away. Why me? He asked, the words slipping out more to himself than to the alien. The Eldred's response was as cold as it was direct. Because you have already lost everything, and only those with nothing left to lose can truly understand. Jasper swallowed hard, the last vestiges of the confident, detached pilot he once was dissolving. He wasn't just a driver anymore, not on this job. He was a man at the edge of a precipice, staring into something vast and incomprehensible. Behind him, he could feel the weight of the guild's emissaries watching from the shadows, waiting for him to falter, to prove them right. But he wouldn't. With a deep breath, Jasper climbed into the shuttle, feeling the Eldred take its place silently beside him. The hatch sealed with a soft hiss, and the engines roared to life. As the vibrations coursed through the craft, a strange calm settled over him. There was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, this wasn't just a mission. It was a reckoning, one that would either break him or transform him in ways he couldn't yet fathom. The shuttle soared into the void, the stars stretching out like faint whispers against the endless black. Jasper kept his hands steady on the controls, but he was acutely aware of the Eldred's unblinking gaze on him. The destination loomed ahead, an empty region of space, unmarked on any charts. Jasper had only heard of it in hushed conversations among guild drivers. They called it the null point, a dead zone where signals vanished, and even starlight seemed to dim. The mission brief was clear: drop the Eldred, leave without a word, and never look back. It wasn't Jasper's place to question the orders, and he'd long since learned that curiosity only brought trouble. But something about this trip gnawed at him, a splinter in his mind that refused to be ignored. As they neared the null point, the silence between him and the Eldred grew heavier, more oppressive. Finally, the alien spoke. "You are uneasy, human," it said, its voice low and resonant. "You do not yet grasp the weight of your role." Jasper's grip tightened on the controls, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "I'm just a driver," he shot back. "They dragged me here, called it redemption, and told me to follow orders. What's there to understand?" The Eldred's gaze softened, if such a thing was possible for its angular, alien features. "You are no longer merely a driver, Jasper. Not here. You are both a witness and a participant." A cold shiver ran down Jasper's spine. A witness to what? The Eldred didn't respond immediately. Instead, it gestured toward the viewport. Jasper followed its motion, his breath catching as a distortion appeared ahead of them. The space before them rippled, shimmering like a mirage on hot sand. He stared, his chest tightening as he realized what he was seeing: a spatial anomaly. Its edges were faint, almost imperceptible, but the void beyond it was absolute. No stars shone through, no light escaped. "This is the destination," Jasper whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the shuttle's systems. The words tasted hollow in his mouth, drained of their substance by the enormity of what lay ahead. "Yes," the Eldred said, its voice heavy with solemnity. "Beyond this point lies our sanctum. Few outsiders have entered and lived to speak of it." Jasper's stomach twisted. "So, this is a one-way trip?" The Eldred inclined its head. "That is one possibility." The words pressed down on the small cabin like a crushing weight. Jasper's mind raced, trying to reconcile the guild's straightforward instructions with the growing sense of doom. He'd been set up, there was no other explanation. This wasn't redemption, this was a death sentence. And yet, he couldn't turn back. The guild had made sure of that. But why him? Why take the risk of sending him on such a perilous mission if the outcome was meant to be final? "Why me?" he asked, the bitterness in his voice impossible to hide. "Why not send some other washed-up pilot?" The Eldred's black eyes gleamed, the swirling distortion outside reflecting in their depths. "Because they knew you would follow orders, right up until the moment you chose not to." Jasper's pulse quickened. The meaning behind the words hit like a freightliner. The guild had chosen him not because he was skilled or trustworthy, but because they knew his curiosity would betray him. They'd counted on him pushing beyond the surface of the mission, on his need to understand what lay beneath the simple facade of a transport job. He wasn't chosen for his value but for his expendability, a pawn sent to play a part in their larger scheme. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "So what now?" The Eldred leaned forward, its voice low and resonant, like a ripple in the fabric of space itself. "Now you choose your fate. You can enter the sanctum with me or turn back, leaving with a fragment of knowledge, nothing more." Jasper's mind churned, torn between the instinct to survive and the unbearable thought of retreating into ignorance. He'd been dragged this far, into the jaws of something vast and incomprehensible. To turn back now felt like a failure greater than death. But what lay within the sanctum, and why offer him a choice at all? As if sensing his inner conflict, the Eldred spoke again, not aloud, but directly into his mind. Images, emotions, and truths flooded his consciousness, overwhelming him. He saw glimpses of the Eldred's history, their knowledge stretching across millennia, their existence bound to a purpose beyond comprehension. "Our kind has stood as guardians of the void for eons," the Eldred's voice reverberated within him. "We do not live as you define life. We endure, persist. Our purpose is singular. Containment." Jasper shook his head, snapping out of the trance-like flood of images. "Containment of what?" The Eldred's dark eyes seemed to narrow, its voice now sharp and deliberate. "Of a memory, one that cannot be allowed to awaken." In that moment, fragments of understanding began to coalesce in Jasper's mind. The null point, the eerie silence, the guild's cloak of secrecy, it all pointed to something far more profound, more perilous perilous than anything he could have imagined. The Eldred wasn't just a passenger. It was a jailer, a sentinel charged with keeping something ancient and terrible locked away. A shiver of dread crawled up Jasper's spine. Why me? Why bring me into this? Why involve a human at all? The Eldred's expression shifted, its alien features softening for the briefest moment. Jasper thought he saw a flicker of pity there, fleeting but unmistakable. Because humans possess something we do not, empathy, the ability to connect, to bind. This memory seeks a host, one capable of freeing it from its prison. We believed your guild would send someone insignificant, expendable. But fate, it seems, has chosen otherwise. The words hit Jasper like a blow to the gut. He wasn't here for redemption. He was here because he was vulnerable, fractured, a perfect candidate for the memory's influence. The Eldred had hoped he would succumb, becoming yet another layer in this endless cycle of containment. But something had gone wrong. The guild had miscalculated, and now the choice rested in his hands. Jasper stared at the Eldred, a spark of defiance igniting within him. You want me to keep your secret, to become another prisoner in this cycle, another sacrifice. The Eldred's dark gaze remained steady. Yes, or you may leave, forget everything, and return to your life as if this journey never happened. Jasper rose, pacing the shuttle cabin as he wrestled with the decision. He could walk away, pretend none of this mattered, and reclaim the scraps of his old life. Or he could face the void, allow it to consume him, and become a part of this ancient, unending war. But was that truly his fate? To vanish into obscurity, another forgotten pawn in the guild's schemes? The promise of honor and redemption they dangled before him was nothing but a lie, a veneer to manipulate him into compliance. No more. His hands gripped the control panel as a grim determination settled over him. He turned to the Eldred, a faint, ironic smile tugging at his lips. I choose neither of your options. The Eldred's eyes widened, confusion flashing across its alien features. There are only two choices, human. You misunderstand. No, Jasper said, his voice firm and resolute. You misunderstand me. I'm done being a pawn. I'll carve my own path out of this. Before the Eldred could respond, Jasper engaged the shuttle's autopilot, setting a course for the outer edge of the Null Point's event horizon, a precarious boundary he'd studied during their approach. The distortion acted as a trap, but it also had an edge, a point of escape if approached with enough speed and precision. The Eldred's composed demeanor cracked, its expression twisting into what could only be described as alarm. Human, you do not grasp the forces you are tampering with. You risk. Jasper let out a sharp, bitter laugh. For once, I think I understand perfectly. Goodbye. With a swift motion, he activated the shuttle's boosters. The craft surged forward, the engines roaring as they accelerated toward the edge of the anomaly. Around them, the distortion shimmered and tightened, the void pulling at the shuttle like a predator closing its jaws. The Eldred's voice rose in desperate warning, but Jasper didn't falter. His hands remained steady on the controls, his focus unshakable. If he was going to go down, it would be on his own terms. No longer a tool for others, no longer a victim of their schemes. The shuttle raced toward the boundary, the cockpit shaking violently as the void's grip tightened. Jasper gritted his teeth, his defiance burning bright as the distortion closed in around them. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it, free at last. Jasper's instincts took over, guiding him as he felt the delicate point where reality itself began to warp and waver. The shuttle surged toward the event horizon, the pull of the anomaly growing stronger, bending space and time around them. Ignoring the Eldred's frantic protests, Jasper focused with laser precision, pushing the engines beyond their limits. The vessel groaned under the strain, the cockpit vibrating violently as the pull of the void threatened to tear them apart. And then, with a final burst of raw power, the shuttle broke through. They shot out into the clear expanse of space, leaving the null point behind. Jasper gasped for breath, his hands trembling on the controls as he glanced back. The anomaly shrank in the distance, collapsing inward until it vanished entirely, sealed away once more. He had done it. He had escaped the trap, defying both the Eldred and the guild. He was free. The silence in the cabin was broken by the Eldred's voice, low and filled with something that almost sounded like defeat. You have defied our purpose, human. You have chosen chaos. Jasper turned to face the alien, his nerves steadying as an unfamiliar calm settled over him. No, I've chosen freedom, something your kind could never understand. The Eldred's expression softened, the panic in its features giving way to resignation, and something else. Relief. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps, in your defiance, you have saved us all. Jasper watched as the Eldred closed its eyes, a strange peace settling over it. In that moment, he understood the alien wasn't angry. It was relieved. After eons of carrying the weight of containment, perhaps the Elds had longed for someone to break the the cycle, someone to challenge their endless duty. As they drifted in the quiet of open space, a soft beep echoed from the console, a message from the guild. Jasper glanced at the blinking notification but didn't touch it. The guild's promises, its manipulations, no longer had any hold on him. He let the message blink unanswered, ignored. He set the shuttle's course for the nearest station, a weight lifting from his chest as he plotted the path forward. He wasn't going back to his old life. That was gone, and he didn't want it back. For the first time, he felt the thrill of forging his own destiny, free of the chains that had bound him for so long. Beside him, the Eldred sat silently, its presence a reminder of what he'd just endured and what he'd overcome. It didn't speak again, its role now more observer than participant. As the stars stretched out ahead of him, endless and bright, Jasper Talon knew he was no longer running from his past. He was no longer just a driver, a pawn in someone else's game. He was his own master now, free to chart his own course. The story didn't end with victory or grandeur, but with something far more powerful, quiet, undeniable freedom. The kind that couldn't be given or taken, only claimed. And as Jasper flew forward into the vast unknown, he embraced it with every fiber of his being.